Rasha Salti is a curator and writer. She's presently international programmer for the Toronto International Film Festival. From 2004 until 2010, she was the film programmer and creative director of Arte East in New York. Salti lives in Beirut and works in New York, Paris, and Toronto. And I'm pleased to welcome her here.
Thank you very much. Thank you for being here. Thank you, VHV girls, women, lovelies, for inviting me. Thank you back, Maria, for hosting me, for inviting me to be part of this Congress. I want to begin with an apology. I am optimistic. Shamelessly optimistic. So, and this talk is a talk that I've been giving. It's a research. I've been giving it, working on it since December of 2011. And every time I present it, it's a bit different, and it actually grows as I interact with people like you. It is always based on the same argument, and sadly, with the passage of time, the argument seems more and more insane, so I hope you will bear with me. Because now that the Muslim Brotherhood has won the elections in Tunisia and Egypt and seems to dominate the Free Syrian Army, that's why what I'm trying to defend seems insane. But I look forward to your questions, and we'll do a better job next time. Okay. I also want to say that I have not been to Syria since the insurgency started. These thoughts and my argument is speculative. It's not prognostic. It is just speculative, and maybe in a few months I will turn it into a fictional, not non-fictional presentation, and it might make more sense then. But it is based on what I have seen from images, what I've collected from talking to friends, activists, insurgents, artists, intellectuals. So, again, I beckon your, indulge me. I used to be very angry in the beginning when I used to hear Arab Spring because I thought it was the West trying to create, again, a reference to the Spring of Prague. And I thought, damn, it's our own historical moment and we should have it. But since people or the international media seems to have lost faith in that spring, and since the outcome seems to be so dismal because the Muslim Brotherhood won the elections, now I actually enjoy saying the Arab Spring, specifically to hold on to this optimism. The way this talk and the Arab Spring relate to this Congress is not only in the way art has forged a place for itself in these insurgencies, and the way artists have forged a place for themselves in these insurgencies. It is also about the subjectivities that are formed, the political subjectivities that are formed from within these insurgencies, and the way art plays a role in these new political subjectivities. The Arab Spring, it is very clear that the Arab Spring in Tunisia and in Egypt has come as a result of a crisis of neoliberalism. The financial crisis that hit the United States and has hit Europe has not really affected the Arab world, did not really affect the Arab world in a serious way. In Egypt and in Tunisia, the neoliberal onslaught had gone far and deep enough that it created a real social crisis. The other element in Tunisia and in Egypt was a crisis of succession. It is important to say these things because people think, or the way the Arab Spring has been presented is as if it was an insurgency that happened ex nihilo, from nothing, because of a crisis of democracy. In Tunisia in 2006, when the government of Ben Ali was trying to privatize the phosphate mines in the south, which is one of Tunisia's important natural resources, the workers went on a strike and fought. And that insurgency was had no presence in the international media, and it lasted for 9 months, and it was very severely repressed. And the insurgency that eventually took place in 2010 actually started from the south of the country, crept up until it reached the capital. The Arab Spring has a history, and it needs to be acknowledged, and these stories need to be excavated and told. Similarly, in Egypt, in 2008, 2009, the government was privatizing the industrial sectors, and the textile sector, which is huge in Egypt, was being sold to Indian capitalists. And as there was a shift in management, the workers went on strike, massive strikes. You also have to understand that the unions in these countries are co-opted by the governments. And so it is a double rebellion. The workers are insurgent against their union leaders, against the institutions of the syndicates, as well as the government. In Egypt, the workers were really smart and really savvy because they were able to address not only the government, but the new management coming from India to take over the factories, and were able to get 90% of their demands, which are radical changes to work conditions, passed. However, this is the case of a couple of factories, but the insurgencies spread. This is a background, this is a historical background to the Arab Spring. In Syria, the neoliberal onslaught was the most ugly and short-sighted by the government, because as sectors that were controlled by the state were being sold to the private sector, to private entrepreneurs, they were actually just simply taken over by the junta around the Assad family. At the same time, there was a severe economic crisis, but there was no crisis of succession. In fact, when Bashar al-Assad came to power, after his father died, he promised that he would liberalize the country, that he would lift sanctions on freedom of expression, etc. And for like 3-4 months, there were spaces opening up in Damascus, and that was in 2001, 2002. It was called the Damascus Spring. But he very quickly shut down these places and took control of the economy, and all forms of political action. I don't know what will happen in Syria. This talk is going to be about the Syrian insurgency specifically, but I will conclude with reflections on the Arab Spring. I have no idea. I know Bashar al-Assad is leaving. I don't know when, but I know that it doesn't look good. The insurgency doesn't look good on your television sets, because you see destroyed cities and you see people, guerrillas, Free Syrian Army that keep splitting into factions and swear allegiance to God and seem profoundly undemocratic, macho, misogynist, sexist, whatever, and seem to have no real political discourse. But it's not the reality. It's what the media shows. The reality, the closest thing that can be explained to what is going on in Syria is perhaps the first intifada in Palestine. And again, I hope that it will not end up in something like the Oslo Accords. But you have to imagine that an entire society has been mobilized to rebel. And most of what you see, most of what is happening is invisible, actually. That people are organized to smuggle food, to smuggle medicines, to smuggle weapons as well. People are mobilized to organize protests, flash protests. People are mobilized to help those who are detained. I can tell you from my friends who were detained that there are army officers in the jails that are pro-revolution but cannot say it, but they stay there because they are crucial to helping those who are detained. That the borders are filled with people who are pro-revolution and wear the uniform of the Syrian army. And they are there to help smuggle things, films, people. There are people who are working in security, in the security bodies that are creating fake IDs for insurgents who are detained. Once they are released, we give them a free ID, a new ID, a fake one, a new name, a new history. It's really complicated. This cannot be broadcast in the news because it is so important to the continuation of the insurgency. The people who are doing this kind of work cannot talk to journalists. So what is visible is very, very far from what is on the ground. It is one of the reasons I am so optimistic. The Syrian insurgency started on March 15, 2011. On October 15th, it will be 18 months. It would have gone on for 18 months. This is a graffiti. Can we show the... This is a graffiti on the wall. I start with this because the Syrian insurgency was absolutely not something anyone thought would happen. One of my dearest friends and mentors, a Syrian documentary filmmaker, died on February 5th, 2011, and I went to his funeral. And I remember, and he was openly dissident, and I remember getting drunk with all his friends, the Syrian opposition, so-called opposition, and everybody was just saying, impossible, anything would happen in Syria. And just a month later, it happened. 11 children, inspired from the insurgency in Egypt and in Tunisia, scribbled on a tiny border town called Dar'a. It's next to the border with Jordan, scribbled down with the Assad regime. They were taken by the police, disappeared for 1 week. Their parents went from police station to police station looking for them, asking after them, no information. A week later, their bodies were delivered to the morgue. The parents were asked to come identify them. The youngest is 11 and the oldest is 18. And they were told that their children had died from electrocution from playing in the field next to electric poles, but their bodies were covered with marks of torture. I'm not going to detail the torture, but basically these children, their parents went berserk, went nuts, and a protest started, and from that protest, a wave of protests started. What is interesting about Syria is that the countryside is more progressive than the cities. The protests went throughout small towns, small provincial towns. The uprising hit Damascus relatively late, same for Aleppo. It's just the nature of that country. Children became a symbol. The slogan says, "Our future wants to depose the government." So, what happened is every little town developed a small group called a local coordination committee, and they were organizing the protests. Their identity is relatively secret. Sometimes you see one or two on TV, but they have remained underground. These local committees are the most surprising new political formation in Syria because they publish on Facebook a page where they have a program, and it's shorter than one page. It's extremely pragmatic, extremely lucid, and at the same time very sophisticated. And they organize the protests, they organize aid, they mobilize people, they organize the smuggling. They are almost 50% women, so there is a tremendous gender shift in political participation. I thought I would go through a series of the Arab Spring has produced tremendous amount of images and videos. And as a viewer, I think we will need to figure out what to do with this huge body of images. I thought that we could go through a couple of the posters that are produced to just give you a sense of the political articulations of the insurgency. At the same time, I will show you images produced by the Assad regime, just to give you a sense of the two opposing discourses and subjectivities. This is one of my favorites because it says, rebel, thur, أيها السوري على نفسك. So it's calling for the Syrian to rebel against himself. And it's like a call to a political awakening. It is also a call to lifting self-censorship. It means everything that scares you, rebel against everything that scares you, that has been holding you back. That's another poster. It says, this humanity says enough. In the small type on top is a slogan that keeps coming back in a lot of the posters. And it says, the Syrian people know their destiny. It means the Syrian people are forging their destiny. Because a lot of the Arab Spring a lot of the insurgents were accused of not knowing where to go, of rebelling for the sake of unseating a government, but not knowing where they're going after, what next. And this slogan emerged from the very beginning of the Syrian insurgency. It is a way of reclaiming your agency and of reclaiming the confidence in shaping your own political, your own body politic in your hand, knowing that you can know better, because what the Assad regime had written, had proposed, had imagined was no longer tenable. And this is, of course, one of my favorites. It says, it's for women, it says rebel, but it addresses a feminine crowd, or it's in the feminine form. It says rebel against all forms of authority. And it's on top, it interpolates Syrian women. This is another way in which the new, apologies, in which the new discourse or political identities or the struggle is interesting. Not only its emphasis on gender, but also on respect for ethnic diversity. This poster speaks in Kurdish and in Arabic. It says, in Arabic it says ask, and in Kurdish it says for freedom. طالب بالأزادي لكرد وعلب بلادي. For the Kurds and the Arabs of my country. Bashar al-Assad had really, under the Assad regime, the Kurds were denizens. They had very few rights, almost no civil rights. The Kurdish militants were deprived of a passport, and the Kurdish inhabitants of Syria had just an identity card. But they were forbidden from speaking their language, teaching their language in schools, etc. And within a month of the insurgency, Bashar al-Assad publishes a new edict whereby he was granting the Kurdish communities all their rights. And a lot of them said, no, thank you. We're going to join the rebellion. This is an interesting poster because it echoes the militancy of the 1960s, specifically of the Palestinian. The slogan, Thawra Hatta Nasr, revolution until victory, is a bit like the Cuban slogan from the 60s and the 50s, the Palestinian. But it says underneath, we will not back down, we will not despair, and we will not tire. And this is a new thing. It was never a question of getting tired in the 60s. It was perhaps taboo to say, I'm tired of being a revolutionary. And it also means that they know that the road is long, that the struggle, that it was not going to be immediate. This poster says death rather than humiliation. And it says in big letter, we continue. And the small slogan again, the Syrian people know their destiny. This is a relatively new poster. There's, the ones I showed you were from 2011, this is from 2012. So this is after a year of the insurgency and a lot of changes on the ground because of the militarization of the situation. This is supposed to be a shell, and from the shell opens a dove and the olive branch. The insurgents, the young men and women who until today go out in the street and protest, regardless of shelling, regardless of detentions, regardless of the Free Syrian Army, have struggled to keep this message. It's not a message of peace per se, but it's a message that they know that the outcome of the insurgency will not be militarized. This poster just says freedom. And this poster has a child again. It looks like I included it because I wanted to show you the diversity and also in the visual languages. It looks a lot like the traditional film posters. And the slogan says, "Leave our future." This one is addressed to students, and it says, "Every day we learn freedom." And again, underneath it says, "The Syrian people know their destiny." And it's basically describing the insurgency as a university, as a site for learning. And this is, again, really important. It says, I don't know how to say that, to translate that in one word in English, but it's declaring people traitors. And that's, again, the sophistication in the political discourse of the insurgents. They want to make sure that if people are politically different from them, they are not declared traitors. What is really astounding in the publications of the local organizing committees is the extent to which they are thinking about the post-insurgency, the moment of reconstructing the country, and tolerance, forgiveness, the stitching back of the social fabric is a major motif in their what they say. Part of the empowerment of the insurgency and part of their claiming, of their taking over of the political space, of the body politic in Syria, is articulating these major concepts, but also creating chronology and creating events, celebrating martyrs, denouncing massacres. This is about creating a chronology. They're deciding that 7th of April is the day of the Syrian detainee. This is something that revolutions do all the time. They create a new timeline. They create a new moments in the present for celebration. You know, we have International Women's Day. This is their or the feminist movement instituted International Women's Day. This is the day for the Syrian detainee. This is part of the campaign to turn attention about the detainees. I think there are some 30,000 people detained, or maybe more. So it says, I'm not just a number, and this group or this poster calls for declaring the month of August, a month to honor the detainees, to struggle, to turn attention to the fate of the detainees. This is a slogan on the wall. It says, freedom to the detainees that we don't know. And it's part of this. It's not about specific people that other people know. It's not about famous figures. It really is about this desire to include that which we don't know or whom we don't know. I'm sorry if I'm incoherent. I hope I'm not. More posters, April 7, to commemorate and celebrate the day of the Syrian detainee. And then there are these posters that are produced, but also Facebook pages every time a relatively known activist or artist is detained. These are two brothers, activists who were detained. That's the speech that Bashar al-Assad gave on 3 June 2012, and that is his silhouette in profile. The posters are, or the art that is produced in the insurgency takes many forms. There's the sort of posters that articulate keywords in the new political identity, in the new political discourse. There is also, it is obvious that the insurgents are engaged in a fight to win over the hearts and minds of the Syrians, but also of the rest of the world. And humor, sarcasm are very important components of the language of the insurgency. So obviously this is making fun of. There is also, they try to make sure that the death is as valuable as life, that the dead will not be forgotten. Important militant, even Free Syrian Army commanders, important people who have been very instrumental in helping others that are, and who basically are killed in the battlefield, are commemorated. This Khalid Abu Salah was one of the important insurgents in Homs during the siege of Homs and the Battle of Homs. This is one sample of a poster for a martyr, and this is another. Basil Shhadi. Basil was killed 2 months ago. He's a filmmaker. He was studying in Berlin, cinema, and he decided to go to Homs and film in Homs, and he was shot by a sniper. So this empowerment of this rewriting the self in the present time, you are alive and we are dead. It's a relationship to death that is completely different, that is completely reversed. I will come back to that afterwards, or further down. But it is not the way, say, Hezbollah talk about martyrdom. It is not the way, it's a new way of talking, of celebrating martyrdom, of commemorating, respecting what they did, and defining a relationship to life and death. And that's a radically other kind of poster. Of course, it's drawing parallels between Stalin and Bashar al-Assad, and it is in Russian, or it has Russian language in it. The Syrian insurgency has tried very hard to communicate with Russians, to interpolate the Russian civil society. It is true that, I mean, the conflict, at least 9 months ago, it has become very clear that there are Iranian Republican Guard officers and Russian army officers on the ground in Syria, really within the État-Major, deciding things. And this has, the international media has taken a lot of time to accept that notion, but this poster and this interpellation in Russian is part of the insurgents, denouncing not just Putin, but the deep, deep involvement of the Russians in keeping Bashar al-Assad alive, supposedly. This is, okay. I thought that it was important for you to see also how the other side, how the Assad regime represents itself, represents its cause, articulates its cause. This is one poster that they have produced. It says, we will celebrate victory soon. We are waiting for the traitor. We are observing the traitors, and then the slogan, Syria is fine. Bashar al-Assad has made very few public appearances, very few speeches, but in every single speech he has said, Syria is fine. It's all fine. Everything's under control. Assad in Arabic means lion, and that is why you will see, there's an image of a lion. The Syrian insurgents use Facebook, but the regime also uses Facebook. This is a Facebook page that says Surya Bikhair, meaning Syria is fine. I took this snapshot of the Facebook page in May, and it was there. I mean, I haven't checked again, but I'm one of the three who like it. So thanks to Stephen Wright, I discovered these guys who are in, I guess in Amsterdam, no? Yeah, and so they have been doing work with an entity called the Syrian Electronic Army. The Syrian Electronic Army is a bunch of graphic designers and activists and computer wizards who basically whose job is to articulate the glory, to disseminate the glory and the righteousness of Bashar al-Assad and his family. And they have produced websites and produced images. This group in Holland, Foundland, have been in communication with them and produced this work about their work. This is the sort of thing, look, they make Bashar al-Assad look like some fantastical conqueror. That poster says, Surya Bikhair, Syria is fine. That's another poster that says, with you forever, until ever, yeah, with you forever. And it is the hand is the flag of, the wrist is the flag of the current regime. The insurgency has another flag. I thought this was really important to include, because part of what happens, and this is the whole conundrum of citizen journalism and fact-checking, part of what the Syrian Electronic Army does is to try to debunk or demystify the images produced by the insurgency. So what happened is this. Within weeks of the insurgency, the Syrian government expelled all journalists, foreign, local, etc., from the country. There has been no possibility of journalists coming in until really very recently. For the Al Jazeera, Al Arabiya, BBC, all these major news networks, the only source of information has been insurgents. And most of the time, they don't know who the hell they are. They just send YouTube videos, they send films that they've shot on their mobile phones. Some are really poignant, some are like in the moment. You can witness assassinations, you witness snipers. It's really gruesome. There is no way of fact-checking any of this. I should stop. Okay. What happened? So this guy, who is sitting with the Syrian National Council, apparently has been filmed as dead, as a writer, as a wounded, etc. This is part of, I mean, you know, the insurgents screw up all the time, and this is part of their, the mistakes that they made. I think it's important to include these images because there will be a long discussion about the role of citizen journalism, the limitations, the role of journalists, the limitations. How do we transmit the story of an insurgency to the world? How do we read the images that it produces? So I'm told I have 10 minutes. I'm going to whiz through. The government was worried about the desecration of Hafiz al-Assad statues, so they removed them and covered their heads. But of course, it looks like they're hanging him. This also is part of what the regime, the images that the regime produces. The soldiers like to film themselves after they have subdued an area or committed a massacre, and they disseminate them. And this is an important story because this guy was the voice of he was a singer, and he invented some of the nicest chants in the protests. And they took him, they detained him, and they removed his, and they sent it to his mother. And they sent the video, they put it out on the YouTube to send the message. Humor. This is a Facebook page that instead of talking about Syria, they talk about China. So China is in lieu of Syria, and they talk about the Chinese revolution against the Chinese despots. And they disseminate information about Syria. I'm just going to go through these images to show you the many. This is the stages of evolution of inhumanity. It starts with Ben Ali and it ends with Bashar al-Assad. This is the caricature, okay. Bashar al-Assad's email was hacked, and we found out he had a mistress who called him Ducky. So, this is shadow theater. The lion is, of course, al-Assad, so Bashar, and it tells the story of how a lion came to a town and ate it, and bought the religious figures and brought armed thugs. That's another tradition of storytelling, that's another way. This image is from a film. I was going to go through now a whole set of the artworks that are produced, but I wanted to make sure that you don't think that insurgent art or critical art or dissenting art happened only with the insurgency. This is an image from a film called Flood in Bath Country by Omar Amir Alai. It's an amazing documentary. It's specifically, it's I think one of the most scathing critiques of the Ba'ath regime, of its ideology, of the rule of the Assad family, and it was of course banned in Syria, but it was disseminated in the black market. Omar is a lasting influence on a generation of filmmakers and artists. So, Omar Amir Alai. The film was made in 2003. Flood in Bath Country. Okay, these are drawings, charcoal drawings, by an artist called Yusuf Abdelki, Syrian artist. They were also antecedent to the revolution, but he was in exile. He was in exile for 25 years after being taken to jail. Again, and this is an image he made with the revolution, with the insurgency. This is the new work from a collective called Al-Shams, the Sun. The Rubik's Cube is always a reference to Russia, and the lion is a reference to Bashar al-Assad sculpture. So if you could go through, so I can talk, and can you go through the stuff? What I wanted to say is basically this, because I have to summarize, is one of the most interesting things that are happening is that the people insist on going down to the street and protesting with their bodies, without weapons, no matter how small and narrow the space for the protest is, they will stay, they will come out. They are usually mixed men and women, and they dance. They don't stand still, they dance. And they dance a traditional dance called dabke, where they hold each other on the shoulders and they just sing and chant and dance. And the fact that this happens like this, I'm so sorry, I have to cut short. Anyway, the fact that that's the essential form of protest, that it's based on the body. That's my argument. My argument is that the new political subjectivity emerges not from discourse or ideology, emerges from the body. In Egypt and in Tunisia, and now in Syria, governments are being unseated because people go down in the street, hold hands, and imagine another world. And they dance. They don't scream anger, they don't scream rage, they rejoice. When there's a martyr, when somebody's dead, they hold the body, and around the body, they dance. They dance the wedding dance. They don't dance a funeral dance. This new political subjectivity, which is profoundly physical, which is redefining the space, not only of the street, but of the city and of social organization, is profoundly, it's okay. Thank you. Is profoundly antithetical to what you see in the news, which is the Muslim Brotherhood winning. The Muslim Brotherhood won the elections. The Muslim Brotherhood and the Salafists are scary, and they denigrate the body, and they are not really connected to this new political subjectivity that is being born. But I think that insurgencies have another time, beckon another time. New political subjectivities take time to articulate. There had to be elections. The most spectacular victims of the despotic regimes won the elections. It's a bit of a classical scenario, but something else is in the works. How much time do I have? 5 minutes. In Syria, art education does not include conceptual art. They don't teach them about the Situationists or about Marcel Duchamp or any of that. However, I just want to share with you a few of the things that they have done. Whether they are artists or insurgents, I don't know. But I know that from within these artistic practices, or from within the language of art, or from within the field of art, new political subjectivities are being born. And they are immediately connected to this dancing. They are immediately connected to humor, to sarcasm, to imagining another world where men and women are equal, where Arabs, Kurds, and other ethnicities live together, where people who were on the other side in the post are maybe forgiven. This is sort of the civic imaginary of the insurgency. So one morning, Damascus, the Syrians are obsessed with fountains, and Damascus has hundreds of fountains. One morning, the city woke up to find that somebody had put red paint in the fountains, and it looked like fountains of blood. And the army freaked out, and within a few hours, they drained the water out of the fountains. This we might call an intervention, a happening, or whatever. It's an artistic gesture. and the profoundly political, peaceful gesture. That's young men and women with cameras have been documenting the insurgency, and they have formed anonymous groups, this one for every town. This one is called the Lens of a Young Man from Homs. Lens of a Young Man from Dra. What is interesting is that they have first produced images that the media have used to show stuff, to show destruction, to document. But eventually, they have been playing with the images and doing things that are not photojournalism, that go a step up. And these are people who are 16 and 18 years old. So while where art is lending a language to political insurgency, within the insurgency, people are finding, are exploring with poetic gestures. This is a protest where people carry the loaf of bread to say bread, dignity, and justice. These are the images of people dancing. You see how they stand in rows, shoulder to shoulder, dancing. They just dance. They just dance. The body. A lot of the inscriptions are on the body, on the hands. They carry cardboard paper, but the body is come back as a place to start from, to imagine a new world, a new society. I wanted to conclude with reflections on 3 key words, but there's no time because I want to conclude, because I've listened to this morning and I want to be more specific to this conversation happening here. This is a film called Stars in Broad Daylight by Osama Muhammad. I want to conclude with it, with the story. This film was made in 1988. Osama Muhammad studied in the Soviet Union at the fantastic Moscow Vigik Film School, came back to Syria. The way it works in Syria is, used to work in Syria. We'll see how it happens after the insurgency. You write a script. First you have to affiliate to the National Film Organization. Then you write a script, you submit it for a permission to shoot. A committee reads it, gives you the permission or not, and then they give you the money. The state funded all of the production of films. They give you money to produce your film, you do it, and then you submit it to another committee to get a permission to screen it. This is exactly what happened with Osama Muhammad. He wrote the film, and he got the approval for the script, and then he shot the film, and then he showed the final cut to the committee, and that's when the problem started. The committee looked at the film, and they were supposed to write a report to the director of the National Film Organization. They called the director and they said, "We can't write a report." And he said, "Why?" They said, "Just watch the film, you'll understand." He didn't understand. He watched the film, he realized he cannot write the report. So, during that time, a French journalist from Libération was visiting Damascus. He met Osama Muhammad. Osama showed him the film, and the guy said, "You must go to Cannes Film Festival." And he wrote to somebody in Cannes, and they flew to Damascus. They saw the film. They were stunned. It was selected for the quinzaine, but it couldn't go without the permission. So the director of the National Film Organization calls the Minister of Culture and tells her, "This film is invited to Cannes. I can't write a report about it. Can you watch it?" And she said, "Why can't you tell me what's wrong with it?" He said, "I can't." And so she watched it. And she decided that Hafiz al-Assad should see it. She could not write a report. She could not sign on either censoring the film or sending it to Cannes. Hafiz al-Assad saw it and said, "Let it go to Cannes, but the Syrian people can never see this film." The reason is, it went to Cannes. The reason is, and until now it remains banned. The reason is because it's a story of a family where there's a guy who's a complete asshole, who's a patriarch, who works in the phone. In the old days, there used to be a central phone where you connected. And so he listened to everybody's conversations. And that's how he created his power and a web of power, of control. At the same time, his family owns a piece of land in the nearby village, nearby to the town, and the piece of land right next to it is owned by his cousin. He wanted to conjoin the two pieces of land to cultivate them better and make more money. So he fixed his sister to marry the cousin, and for the cousin's sister to marry his brother. So, you know, the consolidation. The wedding doesn't take place, it doesn't work, and, you know, eventually it's like a drama. The problem was that the main character, that asshole, the patriarch, is the guy in the plaid suit, laughing. He looked exactly like Hafiz al-Assad, and he spoke exactly like Hafiz al-Assad. The problem was that nobody could write this down. Nobody wanted to be held responsible for saying that this actor, this is what Hafiz al-Assad looks like. Nobody wanted a written record of that, except for Hafiz al-Assad. Now, the film ends, so in this whole drama, the guy who's standing up in the middle and who's laughing is the poor brother who was abused as a child, who was beaten so much that he's hard of hearing. And because he was hard of hearing, they thought he was stupid. This guy in the end breaks off with the family and decides to go to Damascus and to make his own life. And the last scene of the film, he is sleeping on the rooftop with his cousin who lives in Damascus, also very poor. The cousin is in the army. And they're talking about the future. So the cousin is asking the guy, what do you want to do? He says, I want to open a little shop with birds and I want to sell sodas. And then the cousin asks the army, tells him, what do you want to do after your military service is over? He says, I want to go back to the village and open a tank repair shop. When the film was made in 1988, when we heard tank repair shop, we thought it was the most scathing critique of the Syrian army and of the Assad rule. Today, when we hear it, it means reconciliation. And this is the power of art. This film was made, funded by the most despotic, disgusting regime in the Arab world. This film was banned from screening and has circulated all over the Arab world. It was made in 1988. Its contemporaneity is unbelievable. The space that it opens in the imaginary is unbelievable. The political possibilities that it contains within its poetry are unimaginable. I have not sat with a political activist that has this sharpness and this acuity. What can art do? Where is the place of contemporary art? I don't know, but we have these films and we have these people and we have an imaginary that's totally mobilized, that's creating, opening new horizons, where we can be egalitarian, civil, loving, accepting, I don't know, where we can forge our destiny. So I usually conclude this talk by saying, shall we dance?